Honorable members, I'm in receipt of a letter from Mr. Yogi Raj Das, chairman of the Canals Folder NBC, where he drew attention to social media posts by honorable members of this House. These posts, he says, were inaccurate and totally wrong. There has been precedents where in previous parliaments where matters pertaining to social media posts were raised. The statements published by members in their private capacity on their private social media pages, I am of the view that the Speaker or the House cannot compel members to one, desist from posting any further inaccurate information on social media, two, delete all inaccurate and inflammatory posts on social media, three, offer an apology in Parliament. I, however, urge honourable members to be careful with respect to the accuracy of the information you publish and to take into account the responsibilities of the offices you hold and those you represent. If we are to win hearts and minds and earn respect and reinforce our credibility, we have to be truthful and honest with our facts. Honorable Mr. Clerk.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers and reports, etc.
Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance.
Mr. Speaker, I present to this Honorable House the following papers, reports, and other documents. One, the Customs Amendment of First Schedule number 3, Order 2020, Order number 82 of 2020. Two, Financing Agreement number 6868 GY, dated December 15th, 2020, between the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and the International Development Association for an amount of 18,400,000 SDRs for the purpose of providing additional financing for the Flood Risk Management Project Loan number 5474 GY. 3. Financing Agreement number 6802 GY, dated December 15, 2020, between the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and the International Development Association for an amount of 5,400,000 SDRs for the purpose of financing the COVID-19 Emergency Response Project. 4. The Public Loan Increasing of Limit Order 2021, number 2 of 2021. And 5. The External Loan Increasing of Limit Order 2021, number 3 of 2021.
Thank you, Honorable Minister.
Reports from committees.
Honorable members, I present to the Assembly the minutes of the proceedings of the second meeting of the Committee of Selection, which was held on Monday, 28th of December 2020.
Oral questions without notice. Questions on notice.
Honorable members, there are 4 questions on today's order paper, and they are for written replies. Question number 1 is in the name of the Honorable Member, Ms. Anne Ferguson, and is for the Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance. Question number 2 Questions number 2 and 3 are in the name of the Honorable Member, Mr. David Patterson. Question number 2 is for the Honorable Minister of Public Works. And question number 3 is for the Honorable Minister of Natural Resources. Question number 4 is in the name of the Honorable Member, Mr. Kendall Ramjatan. It's for the Honorable Minister of Agriculture. These answers have been received and have, therefore, in accordance with our standing orders, been circulated. Mr. Clerk.
Statements by ministers, including policy statements.
Honorable Member, we have a statement from the Honorable Member, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Mr. Twelfth.
Mr. Speaker, colleague members of Parliament, you are aware on January 7th, 2021, the President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela announced during a meeting of the National Defense Council that he had established a new maritime territory of Venezuela. This territory is called the Territory for the Development of the Atlantic Side, in order to provide adequate protection and safeguard the jurisdiction of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Following the announcement of President Maduro's decree of January 7th, there was increased activity in Guyana's maritime space by Venezuelan Navy vessels and other Venezuelan state assets. Such illegal activity continues to undermine Guyana's development by threatening Guyana's sovereign rights of its maritime space and hindering economic activity. Proving this threat is the unfortunate incident of January 21st, 2021, when two Guyanese fishing vessels, namely Lady Nayera and Seaworld, were intercepted by Venezuelan naval vessels. Comandante Hugo Chavez, CG-24, off the coast of Miami Point, and this is well within Guyana's territory. The crew on both vessels were illegally detained by the Venezuelan government and are currently still in detention in Port Valera. Guyana has strongly condemned the illegal detention of its citizens and the illegal seizure of their fishing vessels by the Venezuelan Navy. As I speak, my ministry continues to engage the international community to resolve this issue in the most peaceful and diplomatic manner. At his request, I had a virtual meeting with my Venezuelan counterpart, Foreign Minister Jorge Areza, on January 25th. And this was to discuss the detention of the fishing vessels and the crew, as well as the status and their release. Individual member states of CARICOM and the community as a whole have denounced the action taken by the Venezuelans, calling upon them to release the crew and the vessels. The Organization of American States has also issued a statement in which it points out that the resolution of the territorial dispute between Venezuela and Guyana is a matter that lies under international jurisdiction and cannot be settled by unilateral action. Any attempt to derail the international legal process, such as the decree issued by Maduro regime, is contrary to international law and standards and has no legal bearing on significance. We are encouraged that the international community is seized by this matter and has encouraged Venezuela to release all Guyanese nationals and their fishing vessels and to desist from actions that violate international law and threaten the peace and stability of the region. Guyana values highly the support which it has received and continues to receive from individual member states of the international community, such as Belize, Brazil, Canada, France, Trinidad and Tobago, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America, as well as through regional and international groupings of CARICOM, the OAS, Commonwealth, the Organization of Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific States, and the European Union in its strenuous endeavors to preserve its sovereignty and territorial integrity. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the National Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the National Assembly moved by a minister. Introduction of bills.
Honorable Member, Mr. Sherrod Duncan, will move the following motion. Mr. Duncan, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very good morning. Be it resolved, Mr. Speaker, that the National Assembly, in accordance with the Standing Orders number 52-1, grant leave for the introduction and first reading of the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Control Amendment Bill 2020, number 16 of 2020. A bill entitled an act to amend the Narcotic Drug and Psychotropic Substances Control Act. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member, you are allowed to make a brief statement because this is a motion you're moving to have the National Assembly entertain your bill.
Thank you for your leave, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and colleagues, as you know, this is a very pervasive issue engaging not only Guyanese society, but the international community and CARICOM as well, who has done an extensive study and research on the subject matter at hand, Mr. Speaker. And it would seem that in the initial stages, while this substance, marijuana, weed, was deemed illegal, CARICOM's research has shown that it was due to the advent of what we might now call international corporations seeking to introduce other substances in our society, in our region, and in our country. But all of that, Mr. Speaker, has now been overtaken by time, overtaken by science, overtaken by research. And what has happened since then is that we have had thousands of our young people that CARICOM points out are no better off from incarceration in terms of curbing their use of marijuana, cannabis, weed, however you describe it. As a matter of fact, the research from CARICOM tells us that they are worse off from being incarcerated. Right? It tells us that they are worse off. And this is the CARICOM Regional Commission on Marijuana, an extensive piece of research. And I'm going to quote a few parts of that. So again, Mr. Speaker, the issue surrounding the usage of cannabis marijuana. They are well known in Guyana. Its cultivation and importation were criminalized as early as 1913 in Jamaica, and then Guyana naturally followed. The views regarding the use of cannabis marijuana, they have evolved. Again, according to CARICOM's Regional Commission on Marijuana, these views are broad, according to the report, and I quote, broad beyond the narrow constraints of medicinal marijuana, to embrace notions of social justice, human rights, economics, regional hegemony, and the right to health. So it is multifaceted, again, overtaken by time, by research, by the science. Mr. Speaker, if we have followed the thousands of Guyanese incarcerated for the possession of small amounts of a piece of plant, their lives altered irrevocably, then this bill amending sections of the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Control Act of '88 is a prayer answered for so many citizens, and it is justice done for many, many others. Again, CARICOM Regional Commission on Marijuana is instructive, Mr. Speaker, that the regional leaders have expressed deep concern that thousands of young people throughout the region have suffered incarceration for marijuana use and consumption, and many, after their first experience with the law, resolved to continue with crime as a way of life. It is noteworthy, Mr. Speaker, that the draft bill is intended to repeal custodial sentences for possession of 30 grams and under of cannabis. And it had its first iteration under the APNU AFC coalition government. Mr. Speaker, we must all rise to meet the challenges and the demand of existing international treaty framework on cannabis. And we must tear down by this simple act, as the CARICOM report spells out, as international treaty spells out, draconian, prohibitionist legal regime that exists. Mr. Speaker, I was privileged to be in some communities in Region 3, IFLAT, and you name it, approached by several young persons, young men, who encouraged us to pursue this legislation because they enjoy the use of cannabis marijuana just like persons in any other part of this country, and perhaps from this house. Perhaps. Mr. Speaker, I heard some comments attributed to the Minister of Education just yesterday concerning our teachers, and I had the impression she had to have been using some high grade, and so I said, free up the weed. Free it up. These are tense times, and people might need some kind of recourse to de-escalate, decompress, to calm them down. Right? Certainly the Venezuelans could use some, and the foreign minister there. Right? Back to the issue, Mr. Speaker. This is an issue that I think reaches across the aisle. And we have the opportunity here to be honest interlocutors, because a lot of people have been calling for unity, and this is an issue that reaches across the aisle into every constituency in this country. And we have an opportunity here, I think, to work together in the interest of all Guyanese. We have received serious reports from cancer patients that in many instances, the only mitigating factor to the pains that they face, that they feel, mitigating factors, right, is the use of marijuana, right, mitigating use. So, Mr. Speaker, we believe that the idea of the decriminalization of marijuana use in this country is an idea whose time has come. Mr. Speaker, there are those in our society who want to, if you are found with a little bit of a piece of a plant, you must go to counseling. You must go to counseling. We could recommend counseling for so many issues that we face in this society. Possession of a piece of plant, you must go to counseling. They want to decriminalize.
Honorable member, just permit me to read the standing order with respect to seeking leave for this bill to be introduced. Standing Order 52-2 says, if a motion for leave to introduce a private member's bill is opposed, the Speaker, after permitting a brief explanatory statement by the member moving for leave and by the member opposing, may without further debate or amendment put the question. So there are two issues on the standing order, a brief statement by the proposer and those opposing a brief statement from that side. My interpretation of that, there should be two speakers. I see a lineup of 9 speakers. I am prepared to entertain all of this before we put the motion. So proceed now, Honorable Member.
Gracious COVID-free Speaker, thank you for your guidance. Mr. Speaker, again, the idea of the decriminalization of marijuana, cannabis usage in our society is an idea whose time has come. And so we invite our colleagues on the other side to work with us. Practice what you preach, this talk of unity, and let us present a bill that is workable and acceptable to the Guyanese people. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. I have the Honorable Member, Ms. Priya Manikchan, the Honorable Minister of Education.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, and to you and the House, sir, and to your families and the staff of the Parliament, a very happy New Year. Mr. Speaker, we were just exposed to a definition, the epitome of what Ambassador John Deal called sanctimonious gangsterism. Mr. Speaker, this motion that is brought here by the Honorable Sherrod Duncan seeks to introduce a bill to the National Assembly that is identical to a bill that was drafted by Mark Waldron, attorney at law, and Nigel Hughes, attorney at law, and laid before the then National Assembly, identical in every regard except for the amount of cannabis that the bill seeks to address. Every regard, lazy attempt at a draft, lazy. No effort to attempt even to examine and interrogate the issue that we are trying to resolve for fellow Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, the December 11 iNews report on this issue reports that MP Carrington, Michael Carrington, had laid before the National Assembly a bill to amend the Narcotics, Drug and Psychotropic Substances Act. What the MP sought to do, and it was a government MP, the government of the day was the APNU AFC, many of whose members are currently sitting in this National Assembly. What they sought, this honorable MP sought to do, was not decriminalize marijuana. Apparently, the honorable member who has laid the bill cannot distinguish between sentencing and decriminalization. They sought to allow persons who had been found in possession of 200 grams of cannabis to allow the courts the discretion of sentencing outside of incarceration. That bill was in the National Assembly from the beginning of the APNU's term to the end of the APNU's term, including the 5 months they stole from this country. Mr. Speaker, this was the position of the then government. Reported in the June 20th, 2017 edition of the Guyana Times, 2 years after the bill had been laid. Minister of State, Mr. Joseph Harmon, who now enjoys the very honorable seat of Leader of the Opposition, said recently, and who is in this House today, said recently that sentencing people for possessing small amounts of marijuana was a matter for the judiciary to concern. Brush this fly off my back. Brush this fly of addressing the people who need addressing off my back. That same date in 2017, June 20th, the then President David Granger had cautioned, and I'm quoting, let me quote the whole article. While the decriminalization or legalization of the marijuana movement is gaining much momentum worldwide, President David Granger had cautioned against buying into practices embarked upon by developed countries that have the requisite framework in place to support such legislative reforms. President Granger made it clear that such reforms were not a current concern of the government, and on a more personal note, he declared that he would not subscribe to the usage of marijuana. This is his leader, the gentleman honorable member who seeks the latest bill in this National Assembly today that is no different from the bill that came before, except that it is allowing more usage, is all of a sudden his party wants to tell us they have been reformed. In August of 2017, sir, August now of 2017, Mr. Carrington again in the newspaper, begging his colleagues, these same gentlemen and women in here, begging them to address this bill and saying here that he believes that if this goes to a conscience vote, he will get the support of the opposition, which was the People's Progressive Party Civic. Because the People's Progressive Party Civic has been consistent in its position on this matter, which I will come to in a minute. On May 24th, 2018, in the newsroom, Mr. Carrington says, he said that in 2016, the government's chief whip, Madam Amna Ali, who is also a member of the leading coalition party, the People's National Congress Reform, told him that the president does not think it is the right time for the bill to be laid. In that same report, last week, Attorney General Basil Williams, who is also the chairman of the PNCR, was asked about the decriminalization of the substance. In response, he told reporters that he believes the matter should be taken to a referendum. In the lead up, Mr. Speaker, in June 19, 2018, the Starbrook News reported that Mr. Carrington was hopeful that the bill would be laid before the recess of June. Not laid, that the bill would be addressed because he had mandated his NEC, I think it's their National Executive Committee, comprising of all the AFC members who are sitting in this house today, that except maybe this one, they had told their Comrade Ramjatan, then Minister of Public Security, that he must go and raise this with APNU. At that time, they didn't know APNU was laughing at anything they raised. Apparently, they didn't know. So, of course, it was never addressed in that parliament. This is what and Mr. Speaker, I bring to your attention that in the run-up to the 2015 election, the APNU, AFC, in traditional gangstering style, had promised in their manifesto that they would, as soon as they enter office, address the issue of possession of marijuana. And so, Ross Leon Saul...
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Please state the point of order.
Mr. Speaker, standing order 40A-B. Mr. Speaker, I stood in this House in the past and quoted from several documents.
I first have to make a ruling before you could proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And we have ruled on that particular standing orders over and over again. I will seek the permission of the person on the floor if she will give way for you to make this explanation. Honorable Member, Honorable Minister, would you?
Mr. Speaker, in the newspapers of Starbrook News, the edition June 19, 2018, 4 years after, there was an MP of government attempting and begging his colleagues to address the issue of young persons who use marijuana. And having been ignored and rebuffed, Ross Leon Saul, a member of the Guyana Rastafarian Council, said no referendum is needed for the use of the herb, as this is a way of life for Rastafarians. He expressed disappointment that the coalition government has backpedaled from its assurances prior to the 2015 elections and warned that members of the Rastafarian community may not be casting their ballot in favor of the government in the 2020 elections. Even that did not move them, because they knew they had their rig plan. He continued, I think they will quiver in their boots when they understand we have the potential to become a balance of power in the next elections. It takes 5,000 votes for one seat, and I'm sure right now we have more than 5,000 votes in the Rastafarian community and the ganja-using community. That is our leverage, really. And the Rastafarian community and the possession of weed community, people taught you how they felt about you breaching and breaking promises on March 2nd, 2020. And they will teach you...
Point of order.
Honorable Member, please state the point of order again.
Mr. Speaker, this is standing order 40A.
Right.
by rising on a point of order when when a member speaking shall resume his or her seat, and the member interrupting shall simply direct attention to the point which he or she desires to bring to notice and submit it to the speaker or chairperson for decision.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking you, what is the point of order you're
The
trying
point
to
of
make?
order, Mr. Speaker, is that in the past, I stood and quoted...
So you're actually seeking leave to elucidate, which is
Correct.
40B,
No, no, sir. That is not 40B, sir.
right?
The point of order, Mr. Speaker, if I'm allowed, is that in the past, I quoted several documents, and you ruled, Mr. Speaker, that unless those documents were circulated, they could not, especially newspapers.
So again, you're trying to elucidate on something which you think may have not been totally accurate by the current speaker on the floor.
Mr. Speaker,
I
I'm
want to
referring
draw
your
your
ruling.
attention to the
I'm referring to your ruling in the past,
the
Mr. Speaker.
opportunity that you have at the end of this debate to close the debate. You have a unique opportunity there to close the debate. Thank you.
Mrs.
I don't recognize that as a point of order to give you the floor, except if the speaker on the floor at this time, under 40B, is prepared to give you.
Mr. Speaker, I'm only aiming at consistency in your rulings.
Yes. And I've been consistent with that since September 1st.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so what we see here, for me, is a dangerous attempt by the opposition, the APNU, AFC, and all of them must take blame for this bit of wildness, to derail the process of addressing the possession of marijuana, the small amounts of possession of marijuana. And let me tell you why I say that. I believe the opposition fully intended that this issue must not be dealt with by this National Assembly. Hopefully, so that the government in place will be as blamed as the previous one. They brought something that is so ridiculous and out of place that they knew the people of Guyana would ask us all to vote it out. But we here, sir, in the PPPC, the People's Progressive Party has been very consistent on this matter. We are guided by the Constitution of this country, foreign document to the people on the other side. Article 13, sir, says the principal objective of the political system of the state is to establish an inclusionary democracy by providing increasing opportunities for the participation of citizens and their organizations in the management and decision-making processes of the state, with particular emphasis on those areas of decision-making that directly affect their well-being. In other words, sir, you must consult with the people that you intend to serve. You must consult with the people that you intend to serve. That is good governance. Mr. Speaker, in the run-up to the 2020 election, the People's Progressive Party was consistent in their position on the possession of small amounts of marijuana. And we said very clearly in our manifesto and to the nation that once we were elected to office, we would address how we will treat with the issue of the possession of small amounts of marijuana. That position is consistent from 2015 to now. In 2018, on June 19th, it's reported by the Starbuck News, then General Secretary, now Vice President of this country, Bar Jack Dale, said very clearly that the PPP is rejecting the notion of a referendum, but believes that people caught with small amounts of marijuana could be sentenced differently. And I quote what he said: "Let us find another set of sentencing. Sentence them to community work, clean up a school compound, to rehabilitation. Let us talk to the people this will affect to see what it is they want. Today, Mr. Speaker, laid in this National Assembly is a bill drafted by the Attorney General that seeks to address the issue of how we deal with persons who are found with small amounts of marijuana. There seems to have been zero research done by the layer of the motion, the mover of the motion, as to what is required by those people, by that cohort of the population. On my way here, I just spoke to someone who uses marijuana. Nobody seems to know how the honorable member has moved from, and this behavior of attempting to shame people who use marijuana speaks to the gangstering in laying this motion. You're not trying to serve anybody who uses marijuana. You are trying to make sure this does not see the light of day in this parliament. That is why you can sit there and attempt to shame people who use marijuana. Shame on you, empty-headed. Mr. Speaker, the previous bill, drafted by Nigel Hughes and Mark Waldron, asked for 200 grams of marijuana to be considered possession that would not automatically attract an incarceration or jail sentence. This gentleman is asking for 500. He does not, we know they have problems with mathematics and weight. 500 grams would give you 30 approximately, could be more, 30 spliffs, 30 joints, 30 blunts, 30 joints the size of a cigarette. You know, you're saying it's a small joint. Maybe yours will look like a much bigger one, in which case it will give you 15. Whatever it is, I may be speaking from experience, and if I am speaking from experience, I do so proudly, without apology, for making a private decision. Why are you attempting to shame people who use marijuana through me? Through me. You are dishonest. Mr. Speaker, 30 joints like this would make everybody in this house high for a few days. For a few days. We are not, what is the purpose? Let us not get distracted, sir. What is the purpose of the...
Honorable Member, Mr. Mahipal, 40A, we understand. What's the point of order?
41-4, sir. The honorable member used the word dishonest in this house.
Dishonest? Thank you. Honorable Member, the word dishonest. Could you withdraw that word, please?
I withdraw the use of the word dishonest. The Honorable Member of Parliament, Sherrod Duncan, is unaware of the concept of truth. He is a stranger to the truth, and that is reflected in this motion and his representations, both from the floor as well as his heckles on this motion. Mr. Speaker, what is the purpose? This is a serious matter. Let us not get distracted. What is it people want us to address? What is it I personally, and on behalf of the PPPC, and the PPPC as a party would like to see addressed? What is it Mr. Michael Carrington wanted to see addressed? What is it the decent members, if there be any, on the opposition would like to see addressed? We would like to make sure, sir, that persons who are caught or found, I'd like to use the word found, in possession of small amounts of marijuana be not incarcerated with hardened criminals like murderers and rapists and so on. That is the purpose of trying to address this. In trying to do that, I do not know how we can reach the place that 30 cigarette-sized joints would amount to possession. I also don't know how we will reach the place that 15 cigarette joints would amount to possession. What we need to do is to speak to the affected community, the men and women, young and old, healthy and unhealthy, who use this product, and have them tell us what would be a law that would meet their needs. We can't come here on a serious issue like this and grandstand, sir. This is a serious thing for too many persons in this country. For too many persons in this country. It's a serious thing. And the report that the honorable member quoted from, the CARICOM Commission, recommended not what he said, recommended that member nations, member states, interrogate the issue. That means ask questions, find out for you. Interrogate the issue to be able to meet the needs of their particular populations. The bill that was laid by the Attorney General in this House this morning, we commit to you now, will be sent to a special select committee with the sole purpose of allowing us to fulfill our responsibility under Article 13 of the Constitution, which mandates us to consult with the people we swore to serve. The opposition will be on that committee if they wish to come. The people who use and are found in possession will be on that, will be invited to present their views to that committee if they want to come. The lawyers who see their clients incarcerated every day will come to tell us their views on that committee. The Rastafarian community, who so eloquently represented by Leon Saul, said it's their way of life, will come to that community to inform us about how we can meet their needs. This is the only sensible, democratic way to go. It is the only way, sir. It is the only way that it will actually allow us all to address the issue of the possession of small amounts of marijuana, small to be determined by that engagement. Mr. Speaker, again, I raise with this House the fact that I believe that this ridiculous proposition in this bill was placed here deliberately, so that all right-thinking people could throw it out. In which case, the people who use small amounts of marijuana would continue to be unserved, and the PPPC would fail to get the kudos for passing the bill and addressing the needs of people who use small amounts of marijuana. So this bill masquerades as an attempt to serve. It is not. It is the opposite. It is a bill that intends to make sure we do not serve this community, and we are rejecting that today. Because today, we are reinforcing our intention by the laying of a bill by the Attorney General that we will meet and serve the needs of the persons who find themselves using small amounts and being in possession of small amounts of marijuana, because we care. We care about those people. We care about them not being incarcerated. And Mr. Speaker, it is the bill that is laid by the Attorney General that will, on behalf of the PPPC government, that is going to address this issue. The bill that epitomizes, the motion that epitomizes the sanctimonious gangstering that the APNU-AFC has become known for is rejected by the majority of this House. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. The Honourable Member Mr. Figueroa.
Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to bid you and all members of this House a happy and productive 2021. I trust that we will have a more civil and impartial dealings in the House for 2021. Mr. Speaker, I have listened very attentively to the Honorable Priya Manik Chan, who in her eloquence gave us a history lesson on what was. But Mr. Speaker, this is the present. And I agree with the Honorable Member that we should have consultations. And it is as a result of consultations that we would have had allowed us to make this presentation here today. Mr. Speaker, the past informs the present. And we would have had such consultations. And that is why we are here to debate this very important motion. Mr. Speaker, I rise to join the debate on the issue that is topical in the world and which has significant bearings on the Guyanese youth. We continue to live in a time of unequals, and this proposed amendment to the Principal Act is in a way to seek to address implicit anomalies in the Narcotic, Drugs, and Psychotropic Substance Act. Mr. Speaker, it is no secret. When one hears the word marijuana, ganja, he thinks of Rasta, the ghetto youth, poverty, and jail. Mr. Speaker, in an era when the world is increasingly relaxing the use of cannabis, Guyana is behind. Guyana is behind the times by incarcerating our youths for 3 years of prison life for 15 grams of marijuana. And yes, it is the law, but we have a moral duty as policymakers, as lawmakers, to use the same law to save our young people. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica has done it. Barbados and Trinidad has pledged to do it. Now is Guyana's time. The jail time for 15 grams of cannabis should not be the same as for a container of scrap metal with 20 tons of cocaine. Mr. Speaker, something is fundamentally wrong with this, regardless of who the investor is or who are their friends. And I know that the learned AG will agree with me that we have to, that we must fix it. Mr. Speaker, this bill is timely. As the country continues to witness an upsurge in the export of cocaine, as is evident in the first 100 days in office of the PPP government. This government has overseen the export of over 30,000 pounds of cocaine to Europe between August 2nd, 2020 and December 2nd, 2020. The PPP, as the man on the street asserts, is indeed back. Mr. Speaker, today,
point of order.
no one has
Point
held
of order. Mr. Speaker, under the standing orders and the issue of accusing the government of exporting so much 1,000 tons of cocaine, I remind the MP that you cannot impute.
Honorable members.
You cannot
Honorable
impute.
members.
You cannot
Honorable member,
impute.
Mr. Shearer, could you just point me to that standing order?
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Maipol, you can heckle but not shout.
that's normal for him. Mr. Speaker, under the standing orders, the member talked about the government being responsible.
Thank you,
By
Honorable.
saying you,
Thank
by
you,
saying
Honorable.
you, he meant the government, and therefore he should withdraw that.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable Member, there is a standing order, I can quote it, that deals with the issue of imputing certain issues with respect to members or... Yes, it is standing order 4-1-6 about imputing. I'm just drawing your attention to that as you speak. Go ahead.
Thank you for your guidance, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I put it to the House that under this government's tenure, over 30,000 tons of cocaine. Go ahead.
Comrade Speaker, I crave your guidance. Is it that a member could just stand up and say on the standing order without quoting the specific standing
I
order?
ruled, Honorable Chief, for the opposition. The Honorable Member stood, there was a lot of shouting, I could not hear her. And as order was restored, I asked the same question you were about to ask me, which you would have heard. And a particular request was made by the Honorable Minister to withdraw. I didn't recognize that. I just drew the Honorable Member Figueroa attention to a particular standing order and asked him to be mindful of that as he spoke. Thank you.
Noted, Comrade Speaker, because the same incident was obtained a few minutes ago with the Honorable Member Sherrod Duncan, and he was unable to quote.
Honorable Member, we've had an entertain. There are two different issues, and I can do a lot of research and give you the right thing. Thank you.
So you can just stand up and say on the standing order.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you again for your guidance, but I must reiterate, Mr. Speaker, that it was under this government's tenure, in less than 5 months, over 30,000 tons of cocaine was exported. Mr. Speaker, to date, no one has been held accountable for this nation's world record-breaking drug export discovery. But, Mr. Speaker, what is sad, what is heartbreaking, Mr. Speaker, is that young people from communities like Buxton, Agricola, Albaiston, and Linden, with a mere 15 grams of weed, is sent to jail, Mr. Speaker. First-time offenders are placed with hardcore criminals for a $300 worth of marijuana.
Point of order, Comrade
Honorable
Speaker.
Opposition Chief Whip.
4-1-6, impugning improper motive of a member. The Honorable Member Kwame McCoy is shouting aloud.
Honorable Member Mr. Jones, that is not a point of order.
Point 1-6, sir.
The Speaker is recognizing one person and listening to the person on the floor. Any other element of decibel that comes out of this house during a person on the floor, the Speaker don't hear.
All right. Your guidance, Comrade Speaker. Your guidance, Comrade Speaker.
Honorable Member Mr. Figueroa.
Is it allowed that members can heckle and call names?
Honorable Member Mr. Figueroa. Mr. Figueroa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have a very dire situation in this country where many of our young people, Mr. Speaker, first-time offenders, are placed with hardcore criminals for a $300 worth of marijuana for 3 years, Mr. Speaker. Correspondingly, Mr. Speaker, can the Honorable Attorney General or the Minister of Home Affairs say to this House, when will the retrieved images for the scanned containers will be completely analyzed and persons made to account for their deeds? We remember vividly, Mr. Speaker, that those images were not supposed to be recovered. Mr. Speaker, against the aforementioned, I do not know why the Ministers of Finance and Agriculture are continuing to divert scarce resources to be wasted on sugar. The PPP's government newest export to Europe is far more profitable than sugar. The estates are full of scrap metals, and I'm wondering if all will be sold and exported to Europe by PPP investors. Mr. Speaker, I would agree that the country may not at this juncture be prepared to completely decriminalize the public use of cannabis, but we must make a conscious stand not to punish our youths unnecessarily. While it is true that there are risks associated with relaxing aspects of the law on the usage and possession of a small amount of marijuana beyond 15 grams, this should be contrast against the public use of alcohol and cigarettes. Mr. Speaker, I suspect there will always be arguments on the issue of possible challenges to the health sector. However, most countries that choose to decriminalize the public use of cannabis have addressed projected increase in health expenditure through taxation of the said product. This is a road Guyana may choose, but to do nothing about cannabis use in the 21st century is to shoot oneself in the foot, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am told that the cost to maintain a prisoner, one convict for a day, is $1,500. For 3 years, for a $300 or $500 joint of 15 grams of cannabis, Mr. Speaker, is Jumbie economics. Mr. Speaker, this is, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this is equivalent to wasting taxpayers' money on the failed Gaisuku Corporation, where the production cost far supersedes the selling price for sugar, for a pound of sugar. Mr. Speaker, Guyana can use those resources to spend on prisoners serving jail time for cannabis by buying a metal scanner for the prisoners to prevent contraband, or even a patrol boat for the army to keep our fishermen safe at the borders, because Mike Pompey is now no help. Mr. Speaker, while successive governments have maintained this law, in its original form, the world has changed. Cannabis use is now legally embraced globally, with some reservations. Nonetheless, in Guyana, under the PPP regime, cocaine distribution and export have astronomically increased, whereas the Narcotics Act of 1988 treats cocaine and cannabis as equals. This anomaly has to be addressed, and Bill 16 of 2020, though not perfect, seeks to commence the process. Mr. Speaker, the principals that export scrap metal and its accompanying cargo to Europe may not be happy with this bill, and you will see them show their hands. The truth is, the law and the system has used small players, the small guys with 15 grams of cannabis as scapegoats of justice, while creating diversions by all the scrap metal containers to get on the ships of Europe. Mr. Speaker, today this House must vote with its collective conscience to free the small guy, to free the small man, the youngsters from different ghettos and poverty-stricken communities across Guyana, and everywhere persons who are stained forever must, Mr. Speaker, benefit from the passage of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Honorable Member, Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport, Mr. Charles Ramsey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May it please you, I rise to make a contribution on this motion that was raised by the Honorable Member, Mr. Shira Duncan. And one would expect that if a presentation is being made, that you should at the very least support a position being advanced in this honorable House, especially when you know that you do not have the numbers to support you on that side of the House. And the motion for which a bill is contained proposes to move possession, the decriminalization of possession from 15 grams all the way to 500 grams. And it shows exactly why those members on that side of the House should never be near power in this country ever again. No parent, and I have 2 children of my own, and many of you who have children of your own, I am sure that you do not share the opinion and share the view proffered by the honorable member that you should move the decriminalization amount to 500 grams. It is totally irresponsible. It is ludicrous to suggest such a dramatic shift. And then on top of that, you do not represent the majority of views in this House, and that does not represent the majority of position of the people in this country. Mr. Speaker, gradualism has its place. And when you are a government and you are charged with the affairs of people, you cannot conduct experiments with people's lives, especially young people. I've heard the honorable member, Mr. Figueroa, a moment ago made a statement that Guyana is behind the times. And the original reference, which came from a commission study under the proposer, was that the countries are moving ahead. And by his own admission, Mr. Figueroa cited one country in the region that has passed the legislation, How could it be the case that we are behind the times and there's only been one country that has passed the legislation in the entire Caribbean? By his own admission, his position is illogical. In addition, you've had your time to speak. And let me also address the issue, because that was the most incoherent presentation that I've ever heard anyone make in this house. I heard about scrap metal. This is a debate on marijuana. I heard about scrap metal. I heard about sugar. I heard about shipments in cocaine. And just for the sake of reference, so that the honorable member understands that it is because of the People's Progressive Party's collaboration with the international security forces that we were able to achieve the interception of that big drug bust in the United Kingdom. Listen, you don't start with me. Don't get personal with me. Ms. McDonough, don't get personal with me, because I will have to remind your members of the House, or I may have to tell your members of the House how you used to come to the opposition leader office, Church Street, and used to come for support. Don't get personal with me. How you coordinated the protest up in Linden. Be careful. Be careful.
Came and asked for help. When you were in opposition, how many of your members came and asked for help?
All right. All I'm hearing is a bunch of vacuous noises on the other side. And
I didn't stop you, sir, Honorable Minister. All I would do is caution you with respect to just using people's name without honorable, right?
I'm most grateful, Mr. Speaker. And the second point that I would like to raise in relation to this issue, because I don't intend to be long, this is a total waste of time for you to present a bill that moves the possession of cannabis, the decriminalization of the possession of cannabis up to 500 grams, which is over a pound. You know how much weed you have to get to make over a pound of weed? It's ridiculous. No scientific basis for making this presentation. None whatsoever. Show me the number of persons who occupy positions in the prison that are in. They are in prison for over 300 grams, over 200 grams, over 100 grams, over 400 grams. No scientific information at all. No information about your consultation. You claim you had consultations. What dates you had consultations? Who you had consultations with? Did you consult with us? The second thing that I would like to say, and let me make this point very, very clear, that in addition to the fact that you should never be near political power again, I want you to understand that when this is a policy decision, and when you now have 31 seats in the parliament, It is no longer your call. You have to be led on this. You can make contributions for which we can consider them as amendments, but you have to be led on this. And nothing can change that. Not a single thing can change that. There's an important point here too, because while there was a commission done, while there was a commission that established particular positions, and quite frankly, none of the other countries in the CARICOM for which this commission report was done, none of the other countries have aggressively pursued it. There was actually a study done in the Health Policy and Planning, number 35, volume 35 of 2020, pages 180 to 185 in the Oxford University Press, for which I will share for the member of the House. It says this: worryingly, decriminalization positively correlates with the likelihood of first-time and general use for youths. There is also some evidence that the legislation results, it's speaking about the legislation in Jamaica. Having passed it in 2015, the title of this journal article, of this study, is The Impact of Decriminalization of Marijuana and Alcohol Consumption in Jamaica. So it is a scientific study on what has happened as a result of decriminalization, which incidentally, they didn't do 500 grams, they didn't do 400 grams, they didn't do 300 grams, they didn't do 200 grams, they didn't do 100 grams, they did 2 ounces. What is 2 ounces? Right? So this is a scientific study that if you are coming to make a very important change that will affect all of our lives, including your children. Some of you have children. You would want to know, how is that going to affect? How is this legislation or this policy position, is it going to affect your own children? I just told you, you're not listening. It said worryingly. Let me repeat, because it seems like your head hard. Worryingly, old people say, easy lesson hard for dunce. Easy lesson hard for dunce. It said, I quote, worryingly, decriminalization positively correlates with the likelihood of first-time and general use for youths. Worryingly. Then it also says there is also some evidence that the legislation results in a substitution away from alcohol towards marijuana consumption for youth. So, if it is the case that you're coming to make a presentation, you can't come to the House and cite one reference, which is a general inquiry. You can't come to the House and talk about bauxite and sugar and scrap metal. And then the final point that I want to make in relation to this issue is that there are very different strains of marijuana, some of which is loosely called skunk. It is a more powerful strain that negatively affects young people in a particular way that could be debilitating. Some people have been known, some young people have been known to get seizures. It would be irresponsible for us to have this wholesale change without examining this from a much more scientific and research basis. Simple. Not that I expect better coming from the other side, but it is disturbing that I stand here to come and listen to this type of change that you would like to make, and I now have to take the time to rebuke this. And I would like to, since my honorable member and colleague dealt with the issue that was raised about Michael Carrington's bill, I took the time to find the bill. I have the bill right here. I have the bill right here. It's number 17 of 2015, for which the Parliament office very kindly was able to share with me. This is emblematic. This particular bill is emblematic of the betrayal that the APNU AFC made, not only of the people of Guyana, but by their own members. Their own members. This was laid in the House in 2015, and it never saw the light of day. Not even a consideration for your own member. Mr. Speaker, it is very important that the honorable members on both sides of the House know that this is a very important issue. I would be very disturbed if it turns out to be the case that all members of the APNU AFC's side supports moving the decriminalization of weed to 500 grams. I'd be very disturbed about that. What I can say with confidence is that the People's Progressive Party has introduced a bill for which we had promised that we would do. A bill that will amend this Narcotics Act so that persons will face less penalties or different types of penalties, and it will be debated fully and sent to the Select Committee. But it is something that has to be done in a responsible way. This is not a time to play games and to experiment with the lives of Guyanese people, especially the young people in this country, for which I speak on behalf of here. And I am saying that when you occupy the position of government, and even as the members of the opposition, you hold a seat, you have to be responsible with your positions. And it is an absolute disgrace that you've used this opportunity to present a totally untenable and unsupportable situation and position. And it is for that reason that, Mr. Speaker, I will not support the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport. I now call on the Honorable Member, Mr. Roysdale Ford.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the motion brought by my friend, the Honorable Sherrod Duncan. Mr. Speaker, what is clear is that we have brought before the National Assembly for its consideration and passage a motion that seeks to ameliorate the harsh conditions which currently exist in the law. And we have been travailed by the honorable members on the other side about the history of bills and measures that would have been introduced. But what the record shows, Mr. Speaker, undisputably, is that the APNU AFC is the first and only political organization to have recognized the plight and challenges faced by people in this country because of the legislation. Mr. Speaker, we have to understand that the initial act that was brought into effect, the substantive act which this motion seeks to amend, was brought to this House in 1988, I believe it was. And that was the measures in that bill recognized at the time what the predominant view was in terms that it had to be approached in a certain manner. So I stand here recognizing also that the party that introduced that bill in 1988 did so having regard to what existed at the time, what was the scientific knowledge at the time, and the use of marijuana that was understood at that time. But as my learned friend, Mr. Nandalal, recognizes in his bill, which is being presented to the House today, is that there's a need for change. But what the Honorable Jeremy Figuera would have pointed out, Mr. Speaker, that over the period of time, we have certainly arrived at a point, especially in the Caribbean, where there's a need to change and change rapidly. I don't know what reading the previous speaker would have done, Mr. Honorable Charles Ramson, and he appeared to have done some reading, but certainly insufficient, because a cursory reading would indicate that we are indeed behind on these measures, Honorable Speaker. As far as I know, Trinidad would have enacted similar legislation. I believe other countries in the Caribbean also have enacted, apart from Jamaica, other legislation. Mr. Speaker, we are told that this bill is irresponsible. That is irresponsible because it raises or proposes to raise the threshold to 500 grams from the current amount. Mr. Speaker, we do recognize that this is a substantial amendment, a substantial change, but it's a substantial change which we believe accords with the current circumstances facing the country, that accords with the current thinking facing the country. We do not expect, Mr. Speaker, that every single person, and I don't believe that every single person will go to acquire 500 grams, but it is an upward threshold that we wish to propose. Mr. Speaker, for too long, the people of this country, having regard to the developments that have taken place internationally, are in a disadvantageous position. The Rastafarian community, for which this narcotic substance, marijuana, it is a sacrament for them. It is part of their religious observations, the religious ceremonies, and therefore this measure also seeks to recognize the importance that it plays for that important element or sector in the community. I don't know where the Honorable Miss Manek Chan would have gotten her information from. She seemed not to understand or to seem to have a very cursory knowledge of the operations of the Rastafarian community. The ceremonies that will be held and conducted by the Rastafarians community would necessitate a much greater amount than has been proposed even by the bill brought by the Honorable Member. Research would indicate, Mr. Speaker, that even in Jamaica, where they would have increased it by the amount raised, that the Rastafarian community continues to contend that is an insufficient amount to recognize for their religious observances. So this is not a harebrained situation as the honorable members on the other side would wish to indicate to the public. This has come about from mature thinking, liberal thinking, and deep thought. Your Honor, the reference to science and the information provided so far by members of on the other side of the House would indicate a small view, a minority view in terms of the use of marijuana, and it deals with the question of the abuse of marijuana. There is significant research as exemplified in the United States and the liberalization of this drug and its use in the United States for medical treatment. So we call on the members of the other side of this House to recognize that this is an important bill and to support the motion. Mr. Speaker, you know, whilst we're hearing, Mr. Speaker, we're hearing
Honorable Member, please, Mr. McCoy.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I'm saying that the decriminalization of these measures, the fact that the law currently stands would have led to the criminalization of thousands of persons. It would have affected young men and women throughout this country. Now, Mr. Speaker, we've been told that the references made in the presentation by Mr. Figueroa, by the Honorable Member Mr. Figueroa, are irrelevant. But, Mr. Speaker, they are completely relevant and critical. The PPP, Mr. Speaker, has brought this bill to this Honorable Assembly after the fact that we would have presented the motion to bring this bill. Mr. Speaker, we're hearing the Honorable Member Kwame McCoy barking over the other side. Mr. Speaker, the issue is that this is a bill, this is a motion brought by the Honorable Mr. Duncan, which would make a fundamental change in the circumstances and the lives of the ordinary people in this country. Mr. Speaker, I ask that this House support it and support it wholeheartedly. I was saying a few moments ago, Mr. Speaker, that the references made by the Honorable Mr. Figueroa are important and they're timely. Mr. Speaker, for too long between the period prior to 2015 for the period of the government of the PPP, they brought not a single measure to ameliorate the lives of these people in relation to this issue. Have they suddenly gotten an epiphany after the introduction of this measure first by the Honorable Member then, Mr. Carrington? So the proposal in their manifesto and what they have brought here today is subsequent to the UPNU AFC taking a position. Mr. Speaker, you would see that in Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable Prime Minister in the National Assembly indicated, Mr. Speaker, that this is a substantial issue and that there were numerous opinions on it. Mr. Speaker, the debate in Jamaica, in the House in Jamaica, would indicate that the then Minister of Justice indicated that the process which led to the amelioration of the arrangements in Jamaica took over 50 years. So to come to this House and to seek to denigrate the inability to complete such an important process in 5 years is very shallow, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, whilst the PPP was in power prior to 2050, and young men and women are going to jail for small substances, Guyana was recorded and recognized in the international community as a major player in drugs, not small quantities, in substantial amounts of drugs being transshipped through this country. Cocaine, exactly as we see, as my learned friend and member, Mr. Figueroa, pointed out, that has occurred since the return of this government. Mr. Speaker, what is the relevance of cocaine to an issue of a debate on marijuana? Why is it that they don't want us to speak about it, Mr. Speaker? They don't want to speak about it, Your Honor, because what it indicates, Your Honor, is that there are two different arrangements. An arrangement where, Mr. Speaker, persons in this country ship large amounts of marijuana, of cocaine out of this country, engage in money laundering, establish businesses, and that is one sector of this country. Maybe they support the PPP. And on the other hand, Mr. Speaker, there's another Guyana where small, young persons use small amounts of marijuana. Whilst the PPP was in power, they allowed an arrangement to fester, to cause great embarrassment to this country. Mr. Speaker, how many persons would have been convicted for major transshipments of cocaine throughout this country? The reports show, Your Honor, that Guyana was considered a country incapable of handling that situation and incapable of confronting it. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member, Mr. Ramson, pointed out that there's no record, and we have not brought any evidence as to how many young persons would have been convicted. But it is clear, Mr. Speaker, all the newspapers, the prison records show the cries of the mothers in this country are there. They don't know about those communities, Mr. Speaker. They don't know, they don't visit them. They have a purely academic understanding of the plight of the people who use these small quantities, whose mothers suffer. So, Mr. Speaker, this is an important measure. We understand what the PPP and the current AG are up to, but the record will show, Mr. Speaker, that this is an important bill. We have remained faithful to the position adopted, and we ask the honorable members of this House to support it. Mr. Speaker, again we hear Mr. McCoy, Honorable Member Mr. McCoy, shouting, 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 laboring in the dark. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member Mr. Ford. Honorable members, this is a good time to take the suspension for 1 hour. Thank you.